In this age of total media and information saturation, I am concerned with how we might carry out precise linguistic analysis on very large texts without consigning ourselves to obscurity or madness. I believe that in order for the practice of close reading, philology, and philosophy to flourish, we need to embrace the machine. We need to develop an intimate relationship with the thinking algorithms that shape our everyday life, in order to develop technologies of memory that give us exact control over how we visualize and externalize the contents of our mind. I've written at length in my dissertation and research blog about the practical and theoretical implications of these technologies, but here I'd like to give a demonstration of the most recent and exciting turn of my research: how I've been able to weave together the research, pedagogy, and writing all within a comprehensive concept map. What was mere theoretical fancy just a year ago has become a palpable reality within the past few months, and I'm now faced with the delightful problem of having arrived at a functional solution to problems I thought were interminable. There are 3 platforms that have been instrumental in this discovery, the first of which is Citavi, a reference manager and knowledge organizer that has a paid version for Windows and a full database version, which they've been generous enough to provide for my project. Most recently, they have a cloud version, which has great potential for collaborative research and pedagogy. Over the past few years, I've digitized my entire library of some 3,000 texts and imported it all into Citavi. This has helped me develop a practice of deep metadata tagging, where I'm constantly describing the nuances and relationships between each work and each citation within each work at the very moment that I am engaging in reading them. Context is never lost, as each fragment is instantly linked back to the page from which it was derived. The second platform is an annotation plugin called Hypothes.is. Born out of a recent global agreement to standardize the way comments are structured, stored, and exchanged, Hypothes.is enables us to organize the web in ways that would have hitherto been impossible. All students need is to create a free account and join a class discussion group, and they can instantly see everything the class has annotated on the main feed. For Humanities Core series I'm teaching at Irvine, I've chosen to create a collective group, spanning the different terms and potentially yearly iterations of the course. In the hope of cultivating a lasting space for online discussion, I've created my own course archive website, Mnemotext, where students can find a simple, easily navigable interface hosting hypertext excerpts of most of our course materials. While PDFs work perfectly well for online annotation, I realize that hypertext versions are ultimately the most sustainable and usable across platforms. The third technology of memory is the Visual Understanding Environment, or VUE, developed by Tufts University. This is a free concept mapping application that works for PC, Mac, and Linux. Unfortunately, the project has been lying fallow since 2015. The source code, however, is freely available for anyone with the inclination to resume development on what is already a brilliant and robust application. Unlike most mind mapping applications, VUE doesn't depend fundamentally on a hierarchical structure, which means that even the most idiosyncratic human thought can grow wildly outward in n-dimensional space. One of the most interesting problems I've run into is how to compromise between the radical openness of this canvas and the traditional linearity of our ideas. VUE isn't just all aesthetics either. Each map is essentially a resource description framework, which is the fundamental architecture of the semantic web and machine learning. So when you're writing and mapping your ideas in VUE, you're essentially transforming human knowledge into a machine-readable code as well. Each circle or node has an ontological status, as does each connecting link. Nodes can be further linked to any available web resource. Here I'll link a specific hypothesis annotation within my course archive and embed this into my map. In VUE, there's no pressing need to create multiple documents. I've created a comprehensive map of my entire pedagogical curriculum that spans all the classes that I teach. To share pieces of this map with students, I simply separate the various classes into layers and display only the relevant materials. Here we can zoom in on one of the 3 terms of the Humanities Core course on Empire to see the lecture and discussion sections listed side by side for each day. For the lecture, I have more or less transposed the PowerPoints while embedding relevant resources. Many of the resources here are hyperlinked. Images and citations alike can be extracted and embedded within links and nodes within the map. And these links and nodes can in turn be grouped and embedded further within other nodes. There probably is a finite limit to how many layers of recursion VUE can support, but I haven't encountered it yet. The format of the discussion seminar sections is different, as I've tried to experiment more with modeling live discussion in the classroom. What you see here has been more or less transposed from whiteboards I photographed in an attempt to record what was discussed. In this particular case, we're discussing the relationship between the image and its caption, and you can see here how the literal and figurative meanings of the various aspects of the illustration have been tagged with semantic relationships in the map. The best part is that there can be as many connotations and interconnections as you care to draw between each node. Rhetoric and ambiguity can become visually and semantically encoded without doing injustice to the inherent polysemia of human language. I've chosen to limit the radial push of some of these discussions and connections for the sake of readability. Some of my more technologically adept students are already using VUE to draft their essays and present their ideas in class, but in most cases I'm just exporting them to PDF, so they need to be more or less scrollable. It's worth noting, however, that VUE enables us to fan and fold the entire curriculum around a selected point of context. I think this would make for a rather interesting way to explore vast bodies of research, where the interface is a little more legible and our habits of reading a little more accustomed to the radial. I'm moving rather quickly here, but hopefully that gives a sense of how such maps might be put to practical use, and how Hypothesis might be woven together with other web resources in VUE to create a comprehensive curriculum capable of iteration and expansion. So far, we've only really scratched the surface of what VUE can do, since we're creating everything by hand. There's nothing wrong with this, and indeed, it is a great merit of the program that it's flexible enough to sustain precise manual input and large data drops. Here I'm building a quick toolbar with some of the more advanced features, and importing a few CSV datasheets that I've prepared already. VUE actually comes plugged into a variety of online resources too. Here is a small table of all the categories directly linked to my name in Citavi. And here's a table of some metadata having to do with assorted themes and historical epochs. Once I've imported the data, I can drag each item out individually from the list, or drag the entire column at once. Once I drag out all 4 layers, I'll trim the connections so that there's only one link between each. Now when I use the automatic sorting filter, we can clearly see the hierarchy structure automatically generated from the table, with the ancient, medieval, and modern branching out into various sub-epochs. This is still rather small scale, however. The upper limits of the application in its current state allow you to map upwards of 10,000 points at once. It may seem like Citavi has fallen out of the picture here, but in the remainder of the video, I'd like to show what happens when we join the already fantastic infrastructural power of Hypothesis and VUE with a legitimate database like Citavi. I believe that one of my biggest breakthroughs this year was finding a way to convert the entire contents of the database into a series of tables that can be processed in VUE, and to do so in a way that will automatically refresh as I periodically update the database. This was especially challenging because the hierarchy I have in Citavi includes every author and extends almost 10 subcategories down, as we begin to see with a work like Hegel's Encyclopedia. Learning how to tame such a massive hierarchy so that it might be effectively visualized involved a crash course in data manipulation and power query. I learned not only about the limitations of this tabular form, but also the surprising degree of flexibility and the strange kinds of pressures it exerts on certain modes of classification versus others. Looking at how wide this primary reference table is, it's not difficult to imagine how much of a burden it might be on a relatively lightweight program like VUE. In order to create a live link between my database and VUE, All this had to be pivoted and trimmed. I eventually managed to break apart all the impacted and overgrown data into a few dozen interleaved queries. This map gives a good sense of what it took to generate the kinds of maps I'm about to show, and it's a great part of my project to share this knowledge with other scholars who might be interested, but don't have time to wade through the sea of gray. Much of this I'll be covering in the continuation of the video series. This is really just a preview. The benefits of all this manipulation were really quite substantial. Here you can see the 3 primary branches of the category tree I have in Citavi. Zooming in, we can see the innermost part of the circle is comprised of the authors, with their works, chapters, subsections, etc. radiating outward. Even from this distance, you can see the various flares and gnarls, signifying a density of interest that might have been invisible up close. It's a powerful picture of the architecture of my library and my mind, and it's interesting to speculate about what it might be like if we were able to navigate authors and colleagues by way of such snapshots of citational infrastructure. The curriculum branch is comprised of all the years I've been in school, extending to all the courses I've taken or taught. Expanding my selection to include several degrees of separation helps see the branches more clearly. The project branch is all of the active content: essays, drafts, lesson plans. It generally contains more fine-grained pieces of knowledge that I access more frequently, whereas the curriculum is more of an archive. Applying the radial hierarchy filter to any of the branching nodes will fold and fan the hierarchy yet again, enabling me to see Hegel's major works and their subcategories as I proceed to expand his phenomenology of mind. I can also play with the opacity to see what is connected within outer reaches of each cluster. The next is an intertextual map, showing all of the connections where authors and works cite one another. Clicking at random within the cluster, I find that many of these nodes are connected to Langland, a grad seminar devoted to Piers Plowman where I amassed quite a bit of critical works. Here I'll filter around Langland, but I seem to have chosen a standard hierarchy by mistake. Just note how much more difficult it is to see relationships in this traditional hierarchy than it is in the radial. In the last of these maps, I've pulled together all the references associated with my current dissertation project, along with the metadata associated with these references. Most of the connections are bunched on the right side, which lets me see the prevalent categories at work. If I fan around the book of Heidegger's Essays on Technology, I can see the connections a bit more dispersed. Each of these maps is powerful in its own right, but VUE also allows us to merge all 3 together. This will enable me to see and manipulate a large percentage of everything that I've read and written about, together with all the things that those works have read and written about. Perhaps this exceeds the upper limits of what a human might be able to engage with in a practical manner. But folding the map around specific pieces of knowledge allows us to see the finite contextual relations within the larger tapestry. With this prototype of the mnemotechnical infrastructure I theorize in the drafts of my dissertation, my plan is to write the remainder of the dissertation as knowledge items that cohere in a more or less linear fashion, but can be unfolded at each point into networks of annotation that we see here. I wouldn't include this entire map, since it would probably be more confounding than enlightening, but I plan to take excerpts from it, similar to the ones that I've created for my teachings this year. And I plan to embed these at the head of each chapter and section, and use them as a kind of directory. The nodes on each of these excerpt maps will be linked and redirect to citations within the chapters, and relevant citations in context. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation of my research and experimentations this year. And if you're interested in either the pedagogical or the full database mapping, you can follow the forthcoming video series on surfacescholar.com. There you'll be able to view and peer review the chapters of the dissertation as it unfolds using Hypothesis. Perhaps what gets discussed in the margins of those drafts will also become a link within the kind of constellation we see here.